Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event here at Jesus College in this wonderful Frankopan Hall. It's great to have you here, whether you're here in person or you're watching us online. Thank you so much for joining us wherever in the world you are. My name's Julian Huppert. I'm the director of the Intellectual Forum here at Jesus College. Our aim is to get people to have conversations and discussions about some of the biggest issues of our time. We've been going since 2016. The college itself is much older. I know some of you know Jesus very well. For those of you who don't, we were originally set up in 1144. We became a college in 1496. Many fascinating people have lived and worked here who've really changed how we think, how we act, and of course, how we row. The Intellectual Forum has hosted a number of amazing speakers, and it's wonderful to have the two people here. Not all of them are Olympic champions. Not all of them are top sports people. Some are. Chris Boardman, who's a visiting fellow here at Jesus College, has talked about cycling. So not quite the same action, but we'll see if some of it is a similar mindset. He'll be coming back later on. But tonight, I'm really delighted to be working with Gates Cambridge. It's wonderful to have the heads of Gates Cambridge over there. Eilish, thank you for being with us and for sponsoring the drinks. The audience can comment on whether they're more grateful for the support or the drinks. But it's wonderful to have two really amazing people, both champions and really interesting in all the other things that they do with their lives as we're going to discover. So we're going to hear from the two wonderful people here. So Jenna Armstrong is a Jesuit. She's a Gates Cambridge scholar. She has won the boat race twice, I think, now. And she's currently just finishing off a PhD. She assures me she'll be finished this month. That's a public commitment now. She has to do it. But we'll then be going back to the US to finish medical training as part of that. So we'll be hearing from her about what motivates her and many of the other aspects of her life in conversation with Cath Bishop. So Cath has also rowed the boat race a couple of times for Cambridge. Not Jesus, but we can't have everything. It is a triple Olympian, a diplomat with a foreign office, and has done a huge amount all around the world. Two utterly fascinating, utterly amazing people here. Talk, what does it take to be a champion in rowing or in anything else? Thank you both for being here. Jenna, I think you're going to start us off.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. So today we're going to just have a conversation about our two rowing journeys and some of the lessons we've learned along the way, and then ways that we have applied some of those lessons kind of into our kind of normal life. So I guess I'll start us off with Cath. How did you get into rowing? Just tell me about the start of your rowing journey.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to make sure you talk about your start as well, because I think how one encounters rowing is probably, there's often a really important story there, because it's usually not the first sport that you do in your life, and so then you're coming at it with some other experiences before it. And for me, I started at Pembroke, so only when I got to Cambridge, and I'd actually had a really checkered experience of sport at school, which isn't uncommon in the rowing world. Probably a bit uncoordinated as a teenager. I've got school reports saying that I'm below average at sport, at PE, and I have a bad attitude in writing. So it wasn't looking good. And actually, when I arrived at Pembroke, I didn't plan to row because I thought it looked really full on and involved really early mornings, and that wasn't my sort of ideal of what student life is going to look like. But I didn't really know what I was going to do, and so I didn't join anything. I was sort of lost for choice, still finding my feet. And initially at the rowing squash, at the rowing the Freshers' Fair, they said, "You want to row? You're tall." And I said, "No, not for me," and felt really sort of certain about that, and walked away after having just the warm wine that they would give you. But about a sort of month into term, really, halfway through that first term, I was, slowly getting into the studies, but not really part of anything. And lots of people who were becoming my friends were doing this crazy novice rowing thing. They were getting up at hideous times in the morning and seemed to be enjoying it. And they had this buzz and they had this camaraderie. And even at that point, I thought, wow, that looks really amazing. I don't think I could ever do that because I'm not very sporty. But I had a moment, I had an opportunity, I had a door open when somebody in our second ladies novice crew in that first term got injured, and people, neighbours, people who were becoming friends came and knocked on my door and said, "We're really desperate." We need an 8th person for our novice crew so we can do our race in a couple of weeks. You know, will you do it? And I am denied a lot because there are lots of voices saying, you know, you'll look stupid, you won't be very good, this isn't going to be your thing. But I was so hungry to try and experience some of that camaraderie that I thought, well, you know, why don't I give it a go? And I'm very grateful for that kind of internal conversation that listened to the voice saying, you know, actually, what have you got to lose? And, you know, the door opened. And of course, on the first day, I was completely hopeless. But it opened up this world of being on the river, being on the cam, and being in a team sport where you can't opt out in the way that at school you could stand on the sidelines and just sort of stand on the hockey pitch or avoid the ball. Once you're in a rowing boat, you can't get out and you opt in. And I absolutely loved that sort of the kind of opportunity, almost the necessity to opt in. And, you know, that's kind of how it all began. Where did you start?
Yeah, so I guess my athletic background was a little bit different. I had kind of always been an athlete growing up, got involved in a lot of different sports, but primarily I was a downhill skier. So ski racing was my primary sport. Both my parents skied, and that was my life. That's what I was going to do. And I had a couple of pretty horrific injuries on my knee. I had multiple surgeries, ACL, meniscus, kind of the whole mess. And so in my brain, I was like, I'm going to ski at university. Like that was always my dream, was I wanted to be a Division I skier. And I got to university, but my skiing dreams at that point were just not really an option for me anymore. I just, you know, there was no way with all the injuries that I could kind of continue in that sport. So I was kind of, you know, wandering around my university. It was a small university called Bates College. It's in the U.S., up in Maine, up by Canada. So, you know, great ski school. It's cold, but you know, I didn't have a sport. I didn't have a team, and that was the first time in my life that I didn't really have that sort of community around me. And I guess similar to Cath, as I was kind of wandering around, this woman came up to me. It turns out, you know, ended up being one of my best friends. But she was like, you know, you're really tall, and we really need someone for our novice 8. Can you give it a go? And I think it was just that opportunity, that door kind of opened. And I think, you know, I thank God I was just brave enough to walk through it. So she, you know, grabbed me by the hand, took me down to the boathouse for the first time. Then they chucked me in a boat, and I'm sure it was horrific. But I just loved it. Like, I loved the people, I loved the community. The coach was so just supportive and kind. And then, of course, after that, we all went to a welcome season barbecue. And I was like, free food. This is where I need to be. And so, you know, I think it was a combination of the athletes and just the people that I met on that first day, mixed in with the free food, that really, you know, that's what got me started there. And I think the rest is history. You know, it gave me just this incredible structure and this group of friends for those 4 years. And I just never looked back. And I just fell in love with it.
There's something very lovely almost about us feeling also such a kinship as being part of the Cambridge Boat Club. And we can be different generations, but almost feel in it together and do an event like this and know each other, and that's something I really kind of treasure as well.
Yeah, I do. I love that about rowing as a sport in general, is no matter how much time has passed, it's almost like nothing has passed at all. And you can talk to men and women from years gone by, and the experiences are so similar. And I think it really crosses, you know, generations as well. So that's pretty great. So what I want to know next for you is, you had a pretty impressive professional career. At what point did you go from, you know, I'm a novice rower at Cambridge to I'm going to do this professionally? And what gave you the confidence to be able to, you know, to pursue that?
Yeah, I'm not sure there was a moment. Maybe the coaches who coached me here gave me some of that confidence. I think the sort of helpful thing was there was always like a next boat to get into. So I was not, you know, I'm so grateful I didn't have aspirations to be an Olympian, so I could just love the sport. And in fact, at one point early on, the college wanted to move me up, and I was like, no, I want to stay with my friends. And, you know, that was so important to me. But, you know, another term came and I did move up, and there was always that sort of next level, and then moving from the college into the development squad, into the university. And it really was just at the end of my time here when we had two incredible coaches, Roger Silk and Ron Needs, who really gave me all the tools that I used then, you know, as an international athlete, who said, look, you know, there's potential. This is where you are. This is where the Olympic team are. There's a gap, but, you know, we think you might be able to kind of close that gap. As I was leaving university, you know, why don't you give it a go? And of course, that was back in the day where there weren't pathways and there was no sort of, here you go and join this squad or performance centres. But it was still this idea that, you know, maybe you could create your own path to do this in essence. And I think at that point, when, you know, my parents thought I was about to go and get a job, I sort of concocted this other idea of something that, you know, didn't pay me money, came with zero guarantees, but was something that I just had to pursue. And then I had to create a path around it and kind of, in fact, continued studying a postgraduate level at the same time, which just about kind of gave me enough. So I guess they gave me that sense that there's a possibility here. And once you've got that possibility in your mind, then, you know, it's going to eat at you if you don't give it a go. But, you know, I'm not sure I had confidence. I think I had curiosity more. I wonder. It doesn't seem possible. I wonder if was probably more the mentality. And just that, yeah, always that sense of exploration that I think, you know, as an individual athlete, you have that, how good can I be? But then you have that crew thing. How good could we be at Cambridge? How could we be, you know, then the crews that I was in, trying to get into the squad and then eventually in the squad. So I think it's that sense always that Rowing gives you, there's somewhere to go. And, you know, you've never finished. You've never taken the perfect catch. I'm still trying. And, you know, therefore, you know, why wouldn't I keep trying, I guess?
Yeah, that's really interesting. How, yeah, it's just kind of this beautiful sport where, you know, yeah, you just keep building on it, and there's always one more thing you can always go and chase. And yeah, that's pretty special. So once you've got onto the team, you then went to the Olympics the first time and the second time. What were those first two Olympic experiences like for you?
Yeah, I mean, they were really huge experiences, like more powerful and the impact of being in such an intense world. I mean, Cambridge Rowing seemed intense, Cambridge University seemed intense, but this was another level of intensity. And so my first Olympics was Atlanta, so that's sort of, you know, eons ago, last century, but also pre-lottery. And it was quite a brutal world. People didn't talk about culture or bother about culture or know about culture. And it was very much, you know, are you a winner or not? And actually the only way we can make you a winner is to sort of try and break you. That seemed to be the sort of, you know, and I think rowing wasn't necessarily different from other sports. That was sort of the 80s, the 90s mentality. Actually, some sports sort of still have strains of that. You know, there's no end to what we could do. That's anything that we do to you is going to be hard because we've got to make you tougher, and that's our only route. And we don't understand, or at this point, Brené Brown doesn't exist, and nobody knows about vulnerability, and none of that was there. And so they were hard experiences, and we lost a lot. And the women's team at that point had never won an Olympic medal, and that felt like a burden because people were saying not just, you've never won one, now we're going to. It's sort of like, you know, the fact is the women don't win, and it was presented as a fact. And that felt difficult. So I had this sense of, I've got in the Olympic team, I'm now going to pursue my dream of winning the Olympics. And apparently not. Apparently, no, I'm, you know, in this camp of people who don't win. And so psychologically it was hard. Again, we didn't have psychological support. So, you know, looking back now with all that I encountered sort of later and you know, since I retired, you kind of realise it was quite a narrow experience, very physically dominant. And I tried my best to win in those rules, like be tougher than anyone else, train harder than everyone else, do extra, all of which meant I probably was, you know, on the edge of overtraining, if not overtrained some of it. And all of it meant that I was ignoring other elements of performance. And so ultimately we came 7th in the first Olympics. I was only in the team a couple of years, and I thought, well, I know the rules. All I've got to do is for 4 years train even harder. And then all will come good in the second one. And in the second one, I came ninth. And that was probably just a huge, huge low point in thinking, I've literally killed myself training 3 times a day, 7 days a week, most weeks of the year, and I've gone slower. That's pretty stupid. I've not been very smart about this. What am I missing? But also it was a space where we were being defined by results and results only. So inevitably with that came a sense of unbelievable failure and sort of worthlessness. So, on a scale I had not contemplated or imagined possible, the first Olympics were brutal.
That does sound, oh gosh, that sounds awful.
That's a little bit better, but
Yeah. And then you retired.
Yeah.
What was the decision behind, you came in 7th, you came in 9th, and then you just said, what, Olympic dream?
Yeah, I was like, I'm broken. This has been really miserable and it didn't work performance-wise either. So how could that be different? And so I needed to sort of step away and rebuild. And of course, that's the moment at which, some really dark moments, but actually where I started questioning everything, questioning how things had been done, questioning what did we miss, and questioning, could it ever be different? Was that the best I could be? And so I was full of that sort of questioning process, which I needed to step away from. But I also thought, within that system at that point, I can't see how I could find a different way, so I'm going to try something different. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I studied languages at Cambridge, my other sort of passion, I guess, the thing I'd always intended to do that I'd put on hold was to go into the diplomatic service, mm-hmm. which feels about as different as you can get from rowing, although I ended up in some quite hostile environments. But it was actually a brilliant thing for giving me perspective on boats going backwards is not the most important thing in the world. And perspective on my life, mm-hmm. and operating in another area that I was passionately interested in, I guess.
Yeah. And then, so you went into the diplomatic service,
yeah.
but then somehow came back to rowing again.
Yeah.
Rowing found you again, because it always does. When people retire, they never actually retire.
I've
just
retired
for the rowers in the room.
Yeah.
You're never actually truly done the first time you say you are. But were you doing the diplomatic service and then training? Was the intent to go back to the Olympics? How were you navigating that new reality that you found yourself in?
The strange thing, I think, was I was keeping strangely fit for someone who'd retired, but really enjoying it. So I was actually kind of doing lots of running, and I was training with some friends who took me down to an athletics track. And so I was doing some really different stuff, some quite hard stuff, but really joyous training, just because it was just training with friends. And I guess, in the process of distance, perspective, I was starting to read a lot as well. Or I'd always read quite a lot around psychology, but there's much more becoming available at that, 25 years ago. There's much more prevalence around the importance of psychology and how to tie that in, and beginning to think more about culture and environments and the impact that has on people. And so I was starting to think about, I think I could approach things differently, and I think things could be set up differently. So I was starting to answer this question of, could it be done a different way? And so then I thought, well, I've got to make a decision quickly or not, because, probably can't, I've got one more in me. Could I do it a different way? And that became then the challenge. Could I go back? And actually, working at the same time. So for a while, I didn't have any funding because I was working, but it gave me freedom. I knew the training that I needed to do at that point, and I could get away and still have, other things going on. So, I moved part-time, and then gradually basically went back for sort of 18 months, really. Initially the squad wasn't that sure about, the coaches weren't that sure about me coming back, because they didn't have a great track record. So they were quite hands-off, but again, I think that sort of helped me, really. I had to earn my way back in. That never does anyone any harm. And then ended up having, the two most successful years, not just in terms of results, but in terms of starting to think about doing it differently. The sports psychologist asked me a really important question when I went back. We hardly had a sports psychologist before, but they'd just been coming in and was now starting to do more hours. And he said to me, what are you going to gain if you do a third Olympics? if you don't win. First of all, I thought, well, that's a bit depressing. Thanks very much. And he said, actually, I could rephrase it. What are you going to gain from this if you do win? It actually doesn't matter. You know, what he wanted to focus on is, what are you going to get out of coming back? What are the things you want to get out of this? Because you've been to Olympics before. Actually, we can't guarantee the results. Track record isn't so great. And, you know, there's just so many things that you can't control about that. So let's take the results out. What are you going to gain from this? And that was just a brilliant, brilliant question that chimed in with things I'd already been sort of thinking about, but it gave me the space to articulate and almost have a list of what do I want to do differently? What do I want to walk away with? You know, different relationships, a different way of operating. I wanted to show up in a different way than I had before, you know, according to those rules of the environment. You know, I wanted to reach out when I needed help to people. I wanted to think about resilience in a very different way. I knew I needed to. I wanted to be kinder to myself. I wanted to have some more fun along the way. Yeah, I wanted to sort of think, what could I do here that I think would also be more useful in teams and things that I'm going forward? Because actually, I'm not sure the stuff we were doing back then was really very effective. And so that kind of opened up this sense that, you know, one of the things that we talk about in the kind of squads at Cambridge, isn't it? About what does it mean to be part of Cambridge, and who do we want to be in our crews? What sort of people are we becoming on this journey? What's the impact we want to have on each other? And that for me was just it created a different experience, and it also created a different level of performance.
Yeah. And how did the athletes that you were training with, how did they respond to this? Because you had a bit of perspective, you'd stepped away, you came back in saying, I want to do all these things a little bit differently. What was that response like?
Yeah, so I think the ones who knew me best, I mean, but people were generally hungry for that, because as human beings, we want some joy in our lives, we want to feel connected, we want to feel trust, we want to reach out. So people wanted that. You know, there was some shift there was a different coach, there was some shift. Not everything changed in the environment, but there were some important shifts, namely to this focus on improving rather than winning. So there's this sense of, you know, we're just going to focus in on how much we're improving each day. And that released a lot of this, are we winners or losers rubbish, and a sense of, well, we don't know where we're going to get, but can we get better at improving? And can we also take that into the non-physical side of things? So that was a sort of big coaching sort of mentality shift that people really, really loved. And, you know, it meant it didn't matter where you ranked, as it were. Of course, everyone knows how fast they've gone that day, and the rankings exist. But there was this sort of other ranking of everybody, you know, this rising tide of boats. We're all improving, and you know what? Some people are improving quicker, so we've got different improvement curves. So we don't know where we're going to end up, but we're not blocking people. We're not sort of judging people and purely ranking them on, you know, in a numerical, hierarchical way. And again, like that released people. So you got people suddenly, you know, shooting up and, you know, just thinking about actually improvement. And people at the top, you're keeping improving too. So, you know, it felt different, and people wanted that. People were hungry for that. We'd all sort of chewed over what had happened, and lots of people were I wasn't the only person pretty broken from that, and you know, that sits with people very heavily still today, people who are in those sort of previous two Olympiads. So, yeah.
And then that all kind of translated to this phenomenal performance, both at the World Champs, was it gold?
Yeah.
Gold at the World Champs,
and
then silver at the next Olympics. So clearly that sort of new mentality really kind of worked for the team, and yeah, it was quite an impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of liberated things, because also at that Olympics, three women's crews that all won medals. There was this sort of real shift in mentality, and a sense that, you know, once one team's going well, you know, okay, we can go well. It was before almost one team went well, and somehow then, you know, it suppressed others. There was just this zero-sum game dynamic, I guess, that then shifted much more to a, you know, win-win dynamic. And so, yeah, it really was, you know, left me with a different sense of what matters in a performance environment.
Yeah, wow. That's, really
lots of which we take into Cambridge, isn't it? You know, in recent years, this sense of how do we want to be, the charters, you know, and you'll have
Yeah.
As
The Cambridge
President
crew is
Reed.
very, very similar, I think, in terms of, a lot of the mentalities that you were speaking of. I think we've taken a lot on board with that. I know you've worked very closely with Patty Ryan and, a lot of the other coaches at Cambridge to help develop that. But it's that same sort of mentality of, it's about trying to bring everybody up and getting the best out of everyone. And of course, at Cambridge, we focus on the boat race, which is an 8-person race. And so, yes, again, the rankings exist and we have to acknowledge that. But at the end of the day, everyone needs to be going faster in order to get the fastest crew we can. So it's that same sort of mentality of, we need to really develop each other and create an environment where people feel safe, that they can try new things and explore and experiment and ask questions. Because when that environment's right, that's when you really can start to get the best performances out of everyone. And I think if you really kind of put the rankings aside for a second, and this was my big realization, I think, as an athlete, where the moment I could put the rankings aside and just think about how do I make myself and everybody else around me just a little bit faster today, that's when I think I became a better teammate, but also that's when all the boats I was in started to go much faster.
Yeah.
It was really about, this is about us as a collective group rather than me as an individual trying to make a crew and, I made the boat, good job,
Yeah. You mentioned the word safety there, which I think is really interesting, because in last year when you were president, Paddy Ryan, the head coach, had this real focus on what does it mean for us to have a safe environment? What does that look like? And invited you as students to be part of shaping that, which I thought was a brilliant, brave, and actually still quite unusual thing in sport, to be so kind of open about exploring something that can't measure exactly, you've never finished developing it, everybody has experiences safety at a different degree, and I thought was what enabled, one of the factors that enabled sort of an inferior and underdog crew to actually be part of something that was incredibly strong.
Yeah, that you are right. I think last year's crew in particular was very vulnerable with one another, and I think a lot of that comes down to the relationships that we had with each other. A lot of us had been kind of in the program for quite a long time, and so we had this really good relationship with one another, that there was no such thing as a stupid question. If you didn't know what was going on, the rule was you just had to say what you were feeling. And it may be wrong, it may be right, we may not necessarily know what it is, but at least if you verbalize something doesn't feel quite right in the boat, or I'm feeling like, feeling a bit stuck here, this and that, we can at least pick it apart. And so I think we really approached last season with nobody has all the answers, but you have to engage with the process and you've got to be a bit vulnerable. And I think underlying all of that was the relationship that we had with Patty and the rest of the coaches, but also with one another, that, it was absolutely okay for you to raise your hand and say, something feels wrong, I don't know what it is, I haven't figured it out, but this is what I'm feeling, and that's okay. And I think if you look at the development curves of those athletes from last year in particular, it was actually incredible how much these athletes developed. A lot of them learned to row in college a year or two before, and were then, in the blue boat, winning the boat race, within a couple of years. And I think a lot of that is due to them actually being able to just flourish in that sort of environment. So, yeah.
It's a really interesting crew, wasn't it?
Yeah. So our last year's crew was for the 2024 women's boat race. We were labeled as underdogs. In kind of the world of international recruits, we didn't really have that many recruits. We had 2 athletes from America, and then the rest actually were athletes, for the most part, that had learned to row in college and had kind of come up through the system. We had, with the exception of one athlete, nobody with any international experience on the crew. And in terms of, individual comparisons, us versus the other place, we were just appeared to be underranked. And then of course we go out and we do all of our practice races and our fixtures and trialates and all of these things. And time after time, just the bookies just kept saying, you guys are not looking good. And the odds just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And every time we go out and have a performance, the odds just got worse. And so, we knew we were fighting an uphill battle from the first day. We knew, we could see the list of the other places' recruits. We could see the list of our recruits. We kind of matched them up and we said, we are kind of fighting an uphill battle here. And then, of course, the bookies didn't help. Going into that race, I think, kind of a couple months out, things weren't necessarily looking so great for us. And I think, a lot of people on the outside, all the media says this is not looking so great. But even a lot of the people on the inside were saying, this isn't looking so great either. And to kind of complicate the whole thing, up until that point, we had 7 straight victories in a row, I think. And so all of a sudden now we were kind of looking at this as, we would be the one to lose the winning streak, which is a bit of a scary thing to be in, particularly with younger athletes without a ton of international experience. We haven't necessarily even had the experience of kind of losing on those big stages before. So now we're looking down, potentially we may lose this race in front of millions of people. And how do we even begin to cope with that? It was quite a kind of a challenging situation, I think, even up until about a couple months out from the race. And that's when our worlds collided.
Yeah.
That's when, Cath Bishop has kind of entered our world. So Cath, for some background, has been involved in the Cambridge Women's Cruise every year. She's always makes an appearance. But something about Cath last year, our crew just latched onto her. And it was just an incredible, I think, relationship that we had in terms of, you really, the way that you spoke with us, the way that you worked with us, all of a sudden, it felt like we had somebody with some sort of rowing authority that just believed in us. Not necessarily believed we would win, but just believed in us as people, as athletes. We knew something about it. We just knew that, it's going to be okay. And so I guess my question is, what did you see in us? Because we may not have seen it initially.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to have that other perspective, because of course I didn't, I came with a different perspective, and I guess I could see all your strengths, particularly that willingness to be vulnerable, actually. So there was this real trust. And trust is immensely important under pressure in a long race, that the boat race is a long race. So you've got to be able to trust each other, every stroke, whether you're up or down. And I guess I could see, although, you didn't have the, all the sort of background, your improvement curves were huge. Like, you were making massive leaps. So I was also thinking, wow, you're on such an improvement curve. How high up can we get you before the race day? Because the others are good, but they're sort of probably not making vast improvements now. And so, I guess that's what I, just thinking, is there anything I can do that unlocks that? Can we really reframe some things? Because there was sort of one conversation we had at a coffee shop, which is where lots of the conversations happen, where quite a few of the crew, I think 6 of the crew, had rowed in the reserve boat Blondie the year before, and almost were carrying that as a sort of, therefore we're not good enough because we rowed in the reserve boat last year. And I just thought it was extraordinary. I'd say it's immensely useful, like, just such a great thing you bring, because you know what the boat race is about, and you've done well in the boat race, and you've you know what it's like to scrap. I mean, often rowing in the reserve boat is kind of harder because you get a bit less attention. You're thrown sort of all the time to be pushing the blue boat. So you are pushing. Sometimes you get this thing where actually there's more momentum in Blondie, because you're just always reaching up. Can we take the blue boat out? Can we get close to them, sort of thing. So you've got all of this sort of natural urge to improve, to go for it. And you somehow are saying that that's something that's holding you back in how you're judging yourself. So I just thought, that was, I think for me, I just see it as a massive strength that you've got 6 brilliant Blondie girls in this crew. And that somehow, so then we sort of deflated and got rid of that worry and turned it into another strength.
I will say that was probably the turning point. I think we were only meant to be with you for an hour, and you must have spent 3 hours just
with coffee.
Yeah, with a lot of coffee. I think that was the first time that we realized that actually what was considered our biggest weakness was that, we don't have international experience and we're a bunch of Blondie athletes, reserve crew athletes, actually was our biggest strength. And that was, I think, probably one of the most transformative ways of just, reframing, who we were as athletes.
And playing to your strengths, as it were, identifying that, not trying to be something we're not, but that's part of what makes us who we are. How do we really use that? And I think that's the other thing that, the fact when we had conversations, people were willing to sort of voice doubts and things again. And often in the conversations I have, with you and other crews, it's almost that freeing us up that somehow we shouldn't have a doubt, or we shouldn't be nervous about the race, or, what ifs. That sometimes we just need that conversation to go, that's completely normal, and say, do you know what, at the Olympics, we've all got doubts. We've all got, go into those races with nerves and all these thoughts that, somehow you imagine the best people might not have. And again, that's often helpful, isn't it, just to release that, because of course we've got those worries and doubts. So acknowledging that, where sometimes there's this view, a high performance environment, we mustn't admit to that, or we mustn't, you've got to be sort of so kind of saying the right thing all the time. But actually we had such kind of powerful conversations around those things that it then let you just go back and focus on getting faster, which you did. Yeah. I mean, inside the race is probably worth talking about, because it's fascinating to watch, and you'll have a view of the calls inside the race. But essentially, Oxford were favourites. I mean, your coach had said also you're likely to be down, which I thought was brilliant and risky, but actually, definitely in hindsight, totally brilliant.
I think, in fact, he said, you will be down off the start, and just hang on for as long as you can and hope there's an opportunity that presents itself, as I think exactly what he said. Continue.
Yeah. I also heard him saying, you have to go as fast as you can over the course, and you can maintain and you can get better over the course. Maybe not on race day, but that had been a theme in some of our outings before that as well. But it's sort of in psychology terms, Oxford sort of defeated themselves. They were up, but all their calls from the Cox had been about Cambridge. We're up on Cambridge, we're doing well, we're this much up, we're half length up. So their focus was external. You had a brilliant Cox, who I think was also a massive part of taking things that we discussed in our conversation into the crew and pulling them out and understanding, that our conversations sort of together helped her understand what the crew needed, I think. And she was brilliant, very mature in processing all of that. Whereas her focus was totally internal. You reset several times. We've got a good rhythm, but it's not quite, we're going to do something, we're going to try and reset it again. Good. That's going much better, but we're going to reset again. So you're raising your level, focusing on what you're doing. And so then basically you're sort of watching you get faster coming towards them, and their whole focus is now on you, and now you're getting closer. They then couldn't switch back internally to what they needed to do, so they literally watched you row past them. And it was such a sort of clear example of the importance of making your own boat go as fast as possible is generally your best strategy. Yeah. But how did those calls feel to you?
Yeah, so it was kind of, I guess, similar internally as it was externally. When we went off the start, we were down kind of as we expected. And up until this point, kind of backtrack, the last couple of days leading to the boat race, we were like, okay, we have now found a rhythm that I think could be enough to win us the boat race. I think it's there. And this came together, I'm not joking, in the last hour. Like the morning of the race, we got in the boat, we did the pre-paddle, and Hannah Murphy, who was our cock, she was like, you never want to peak too soon. And I think, thank God, we peaked today. Thank God that race was not a single day earlier, because we needed every last minute to get this together. So we knew now, all of a sudden, we had a rhythm, and we're like, we could do this. Like, this is possible, but we have to find that rhythm. If we can't find that rhythm that we just created in the pre-paddle in the morning before, it's not going to happen. So when we go off the start, actually, our start was probably one of our worst. And we couldn't find a rhythm. And we were bodies are getting thrown all over the place. I mean, you watch the first 2K, so maybe 8 minutes of this race. And I look back on it, it was like, we just couldn't find each other. And it was like we had backtracked a couple of months, And what made Hannah Murphy, our cox, just so brilliant is every 20 strokes, she would find another focus. And she'd be like, okay, we're going to do this a little bit differently. Okay, that made it a little bit better. All right, good. Hold that change. Now we're going to do this. And so every 20 strokes, she would find something else to just help us kind of lock into that rhythm. And of course, and she's now watching Oxford just kind of walk away from us. And, but each time we make the change, the distance that they're gaining on us kind of just keeps closing a little bit. And so I think finally she made a call, and it, was something along the lines of, just sit still and calm yourselves down a little bit. And all of a sudden, the whole boat, like everyone just kind of took a breath, and the boat just took off. And she was like, we took a seat. We're fine now. This is it. Just keep doing that. And so then the rest of the race, it was just about keeping what we had just created. Don't try and find more. Don't try and do anything different. We have a rhythm. We found the rhythm that we know we can win the race. Just keep doing that. And now we're closing the distance up. And exactly like Cath said, it went from we found the rhythm that could win the race to all of a sudden now we're in front. And that felt like that was almost no time. I feel like we blinked and we went from a length down to a length up. And yeah, I just think it was incredible because actually I didn't really know what was, as a rower, I had no idea what the other place was doing. Up until all of a sudden they came in my periphery and I was like, oh my gosh, they're there. We've caught up. But up until that moment, I had no idea where they were, and it didn't matter. At the end of the day, it was about our performance and our race. And I think particularly because we were going to that race thinking, well, there's a really good chance this doesn't go our way. We've trained 7 months. Some of us have trained for years to get to this point. How can you walk away, if you lose? How do you manage that? And so actually, in a way, because we were such underdogs, it forced us to think internally because you wanted to make all of this training feel worth it. And so at the end of the day, we said, regardless of the outcome, if we can put together the best performance for us, then the result really doesn't matter. Because we can't control the results. We can't control what the opposition does. We can't control what the conditions are. But what we can do is put together our best performance. And at the end of the day, if we've produced our best performance together as a crew, as 9 of us, then we're going to hold our heads high and say, yeah, this is, we've achieved something here. It's nice the results went our way. But I do really think, actually being underdogs really forced us to have that conversation of what does success mean?
Yeah.
And success wasn't about winning because it couldn't be about winning in those circumstances.
And that for me has been the sort of biggest sort of breakthrough in understanding and in now, the work that I do with organisations or in sports teams, trying to help that sense that your best strategy for winning is to stop talking about winning and to really come back and focus in on all the things that you need to do to go as fast as you possibly can, and and to enjoy that process. And we have such a sort of winning obsessed world, the language, in marketing, in advertising, in Hollywood films, everything, American presidents like it, it's literally everywhere, and often it constrains us. And the paradox, of talking about winning might slow you down, and letting winning go might actually help you go faster. That's the sort of beautiful paradox that I think you can embrace and have an incredible experience like that.
Yeah.
But it's the mindset piece, the sort of themes there around the mindset, the incredible trust in the crew, because it's also possible to go, this isn't working. But actually the trust you had with Hannah, the sense that, we know what we can try these different things, and when we're called, we're going to do them. And we're not getting feedback necessarily from the competition, we're getting feedback internally. We know we're doing this, we're committing to this. That was what was so kind of, incredible there, I think, as well, that relationship and the safety to acknowledge that things weren't right. Because again, often a cocktail feel they've got to be positive all the time, and yeah, it's great, and we're reeling them in, and all of this sort of thing that gets sort of trotted out. Whereas actually it was for her to really focus you on all the things you need to do to go as fast as you could.
Yeah.
And that's really the performance mindset piece, isn't it?
Yeah. No, we learned a lot, I think, from that season, and I learned a lot. I think all of us kind of walked away with a completely different mindset around, how do you approach challenges, and how do you perform and achieve in a different way, and I think actually for us in a much healthier way. I think, most of us left the sport last year, and almost all of us have continued rowing in some fashion, and I think that's kind of a testament of, this whole thing didn't just burn us out. We all kind of left hungry for more because of how special that was for us. Yeah. So I think we've got maybe a minute or two. What I'd love to hear about is, are there any lessons that we've like talked about here, learned here, that maybe we could take kind of into our professional lives or into, you know, kind of other bits of our lives? Sorry, put you on the spot there. But.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of from those stories really, from what I, you know, the shift into that last Olympics, the shift of things that I've focused on since, and actually in really stressful situations, you know, the diplomacy brought me into lots of stressful negotiation setups, where, you know, it's not how much it wasn't just how much you knew, it was again the relationships. That's what's going to make a shift here. And so I guess, you know, I see this huge focus on, you know, in our lives around tasks, and I think we, you know, in my mind, we've missed where we should really focus on the relationships through which we get the tasks done. So, you know, relationships are everything. They are the key to unlocking what we're capable of. They are the key to, you know, joy in what we're doing. And, you know, when you look at your electronic calendar and your to-do list, that's probably not what we want to be governing, how we run our lives. Think of the people who are going to be part of what's on the to-do list, or the people you're going to meet on the electronic calendar. I think we've lost that relational focus, and that's one of the things that sport kind of really, you know, brings into focus. Yeah. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think something similar, where in terms of, you know, I got into the sport because I loved the people, and I think, if anything, the sport's really taught me how to be a better teammate, and how to be, you know, a better friend and a better coworker. And a lot of that really comes down to, you know, really bringing everyone up and supporting everyone else around you, and realizing that actually it's not about me being at the top, right? It's about all of us together as a team, or as a, you know, a group of coworkers, that, you know, if we all kind of do bring each other up, actually we're going to be much better off for it. So yeah, I think something similar, where I think it's really highlighted the importance of the relationships and about supporting one another and caring for one another. And yeah. You good?
Good.
I think, is that time? I think, yeah.
So thank you very much for the conversation so far. There's some absolutely fascinating bits there I'd love to talk about. But we do have time for some questions from people in the audience, upstairs, downstairs. We've got a couple online, so do use the Q&A feature if you're online. But we'll start off if there's any questions in the room. And there's one over there to start with.
Hello. I think I don't know if it's on. I think many of us in the room are rowers. But one of the really interesting things you talked about, Jenna, was the cocks.
Yeah.
And here in Cambridge, I'm a town rower, not a university rower, and we struggle to get coxes. And I wonder if we're not really thinking of them as an integral part of the crew, but more as an appendage. And I wondered if you both could share any experiences on how we get coxes to really feel part of the crew, because they are just such an exceptional part of the crew, particularly when you're winning, when you're racing, racing to win, and they are essential. And I just wonder if you've got any experience on bringing them in.
Yeah, I mean, I know Hannah at least is like very, very involved. Hannah Murphy was our cox from last year, and she was part of every single aspect of our training. So even when we were land training, for example, we would be doing connected RP3s, and she would be coxing us through that. So it wasn't just like, oh, go do your hour-long erg by yourself, off you go. But she was actually there helping us improve our technique, helping us, you know, we connect all the ergs, and she would, you know, run us through a warm-up together. So I mean, I can't speak for her, but I would imagine she felt very part of us. And I think she knew how much we valued her, and valued kind of what she brought to the table. And even for things like weights, where she wasn't necessarily like with us, she would be in the back doing a bike or something like that. So she was always there. And I think part of that is the camaraderie, where she had such a strong relationship with us that, you know, she wanted to be there. She, you know, the thought, I'm sure, would never even cross her mind to quit, because she knew how much we loved her, but she was also part of us as well. I don't know if you...
Yeah, I think it's a great question almost. And I guess to kind of go and talk to coxes about, you know, what makes you want to stay or want to leave, sort of thing. That I would say sort of the old-fashioned view was, if you lost, you blamed them. And then, if you won, you sort of, the crew thought they'd done it, kind of thing. So, often it can get quite a hard time from the coach and the crew, but they are the linchpin. And actually, there's a sort of development opportunity. That sounds a bit kind of fancy, but they can have such an impact on helping you unlock things, helping you develop, help me sort of noticing things, just observing things. But I think a lot of pressure is sort of put, rather than what are you noticing, and giving them just that space. They've got to have the answer, they've got to know the next thing. And so, yeah, I think it's a great idea to kind of reinvent what's the experience we want a Cox to have, what's the experience our Coxes want to have in our club. There is this sort of new, is it WOX?
Yeah.
We should sort of point you towards the
winning Cox. The abbreviation is WOX.
Yeah, who are trying to, I think, create a community of Coxes. Mm-hmm. So Zoe Toledo, Autumn.
Yeah, Autumn Mantel, Matilda Horn, a lot of ex-CBC, well, a lot of CBC coaches, some ex-Oxford people.
The Cambridge Women's
assistant
coach is there. And so they've got lots of materials, and they're holding webinars, lots of stuff. Just follow the Instagram, or they've got lots of stuff they're trying to put together. I think to create a bit more of a community, and to share that so that it feels a good thing.
Great. There was a question in the back of the middle in the yellow. There are lots of other questions. I will try to get to them all. But
hi both. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences so openly. It sounds like you were really fortunate to row with so many amazing people, and I'm sure a lot of us have, but rowing is an intense environment and sometimes the people aren't always pleasant. Mark Sharon wrote pretty compellingly about that in his book about the men's side. My observation of women's rowing, particularly student women's rowing, is that kind of influence can sometimes be a bit quieter and a bit more insidious, a bit harder to spot. And so I wonder, what are your experiences of identifying negative elements in your group and understanding them, addressing them, healing them, and then building a more positive culture out of the back of that?
I think it exists at in any group of people, any level. Yeah. I don't think it's any different really at high levels. I think it's about being quite intentional about what you want and shaping that together. How do we want to behave when we lose? What do we want to get out of this season? What's important to us? And where there are differences there, well, we need to kind of align them as much as we can and check if there's something that's a real problem there. So I think we often don't address these things until there's a problem. Mm-hmm. And this happens in rowing environments, happens in workplaces, that suddenly there's a conflict and now we've got a problem, we've got to fix it. But we never were quite clear about what we thought it meant to be part of this team. So I'm all for sort of really starting to get these conversations out at the beginning of the year. What are our goals? Not just in terms of let's go to Henley or whatever it might be, with a boat race, whatever it is, but what are our goals about how we're going to operate? How are we going to become a better team? What's that going to mean? And part of that, some commitment there, but also, how do we want to show up? How do we want to, what kind of experience are we going to create for ourselves and each other? So back to that question of what does success look like? I think we don't define it often in a way that then it encompasses that. And of course we're going to evolve, and then we're going to go, well, actually, how are we doing against what we set? Or maybe we've got some other things that are important now. So it's also not a one conversation and it's set. It's part of, as we each session debrief our technique. Also we're going to debrief, well, how do we manage when we went off there, or when we weren't thinking together, or when the technique went off, or the balance went off, or whatever it is. And I think, I kind of recently was out saw a session with the England rugby women's team, and they went out, and for the session they had a sort of technique goal, a sort of tactical goal, and an emotional intelligence goal for that session. One thing they were going to be noticing about their own emotions or somebody else's or whatever. And I thought, that's being really explicit about this, that we're developing those aspects as well. I don't think we do that very often. And I think it'd be quite fun if we explored that a bit more, both, on the river and in our workplaces.
Can I bring in a question from online? We have a number coming in, please do bring more. When were women in rowing not thought of as small men in terms of training methodology and trying to get the best performances?
I couldn't tell you specifically. I don't know. I don't think it was a specific flip is switched and all, or all of a sudden now we're thinking about it very differently. I would imagine that's happened more gradually, more recently, but I don't know.
Have we got there yet?
That's the other question.
Dare I say. So I think, look, I think it's 6% of all sports science has been carried out on female-only environments. So we just don't know quite a lot still. And so I think it's probably, work in progress. One of the, great things about Paddy Ryan and the coaches that I had at Cambridge, Ron and Roger, is that they coached women. Mm-hmm. Roger and Ron also coached men, but they spent a long time, and for them it was a real focus. So I think part of it is having a coach, Paddy, someone who will always say, what do I need to know? What's coming out of new sports science in women-only environments, women's health still at the very beginning of exploring that and talking about it in a sports or in any sense. So I think it's evolving, and I guess it comes a little bit back to coach development and sports science almost, because that's sort of what has that impact. And I think we're on a journey to it still.
Great. Let's take another question from in here. There's one at the back up there. And then...
And we hear a lot about the phrase "in the zone" in sport, individually and as a team. Can you just describe internally what it feels like when a group gels together in this beautiful way, like you were describing during the boat race? How does it feel internally?
Wow, that's a tough one. I mean, it almost felt like effortless when we finally achieved it. And I would say we weren't necessarily working any harder. It's not like, we're more willpower. At this point, we were 10 minutes into a race. I don't think working harder was gonna be the answer there. But I just think it was being a bit more effective together. And I think a lot of it was almost being a bit more sympathetic to what the boat was doing, to what one another was doing. It was almost like an increased awareness of, how is the boat moving around us and, underneath us, which is hard to do when you're that tired, that oxygen deprived with that much lactic acid. But I think all of a sudden when it did sort of click, all of a sudden it almost felt like we had a moment where I felt like I actually had a bit more awareness and a little bit more headspace. But you've probably felt the zone more than I have.
Oh, I don't know. In the zone is our phrase for what's also known as being in flow, isn't it? And what's the characteristic of that is that you are tense. You mentioned the word awareness. You're very in the present moment. So you're not thinking about what's going to happen in 10 strokes time or at the end of the race or what the result's going to be. You've let that go. And you're absorbed in the moment in quite I'm not going, right, and now I'm going to put my oar in the way. I'm trusting the blueprint now, so I'm sort of letting that go. But I'm also alert to my environment, so I can adapt, I can change, I can notice the water. And so it's tuning in, I think, to those elements, being aware of what you're going to let go. So if a thought comes in, you're sort of letting, you're just ignoring that one, as it were. You probably can't stop it, but you're just paying attention. So I think that there's, it's a massive skill of that crew, who, although on paper didn't have, whatever, back racing experience, the ability, and it sounds very easy the way you describe it, but the ability in a race under pressure when you've got adrenaline and there's all of this stuff happening around, to listen to the cox and respond, and for the cox to be able to think about what's the next thing that we need to do to help this crew, to tune into the rhythm, is an incredible skill, and it doesn't come just on the day. The rhythm might not have come, but actually you were tuning into the rhythm and practicing that and becoming aware of the rhythm sort of every day. So it is about, awareness skills of your environment, using mindfulness practice more to help you be in the moment and letting go of the results. And one of the things I always find really frustrating when you listen to TV and, sport on TV, and they're sort of saying, they're focused on winning, in some races in the Olympics, they're doing brilliantly. They're probably not. They're almost certainly not. And yet we think oh yeah, they just really want to win. No, they've let go of that. Of course they do. Everybody's got that, but that's not what's helping them. They're really reaching into that sense of, how can I just be really aware of letting my body do what it can do well. And it does suddenly feel easier. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, you can't get it by trying, and it is that sort of X factor. But I think, the trust in a crew in a rowing boat is huge, to sort of trust that others are going to do something at the same time and fully commit. And if, just even if one person slightly holds back, you're not going to get there. But I think, if you get it in an 8, it's a beautiful thing. And if you get it in the middle of a race, then,
There's a question from online which follows in, and then I'll come back there, just come in. From what you say about rowing, is it a synchronicity like a military drill team or ballroom dance team? Is it sort of muscle memory in that sort of way, or do you think there are differences?
So what? Because sorry, we're comparing it
to a military drill team or a ballroom dance team. This is a question from Andrew Lewis.
And we're assuming those are different things. Is he saying they're contrasting? That's
I think it's a little bit of both, because I think at the end of the day, like when you're that tired in the middle of a race or something like that, you've got to have some level of muscle memory, and you've all kind of got to be doing the same thing at the same time. But then on the flip side, I also think you have to have a little bit. I think that's where some of the skill of rowing comes in. I mean, the actual movements can be quite robotic, and that's not going to make a boat go fast. I think where you take a good rower and make them a great rower is, I think, the skill to be able to kind of adapt to the environment and adapt to what somebody else is doing to you and you're doing with you. And so I think one of the things I've loved about being at Cambridge is that we have different athletes from all over the world that kind of come in. And so part of what's nice about the multiple years I've been here is that I've had to adapt my style to kind of really facilitate somebody else's style. And so I think that's where the dance comes in, and that's where I think as a rower I've become much more skilled of the Kiwis might row like this, the Australians might row like this, the Americans might row like this, and how can I adapt what I'm doing to help bring out the best in all of them and make the boat go faster collectively together. Yeah. So that's where I think the dance comes in. But at the end of the day, when you're that tired, you do need the rope. Just I can put my blade in and push.
I think sort of generally I would say coaches I've experienced and observed too much towards the military drill, and actually we could do a bit more of the sort of dancing. But many rowers might, myself included, wouldn't count themselves as great dancers, but I think actually it's that, again, that sort of lightness on your feet, because you've got to be so powerful, but actually really be aware of the weight on your feet and the boat moving underneath you. So, more dance lessons. Yeah.
Fantastic. Question right at the back.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing with us. I'm just wondering, you both obviously stayed very involved with rowing in different capacities, but I'm wondering how you felt individually stepping kind of away from the very high level of competition and intensity in these settings, whether the Olympics or the boat race, and how you kind of find that intensity in other aspects of your lives, or perhaps still in rowing, but what that transition period felt like or feels like for both of you.
You haven't transitioned.
I haven't done it yet.
You're about to compete with Thames Rowing Club in London at the highest level.
Yeah. So I'm still with Thames Rowing. So I've stepped away from Cambridge Rowing, but I'm at Thames Rowing Club, racing at Henley in a couple of months. So I haven't quite done that, but perhaps.
I haven't totally done it. I still race at the head of Charles in masters level crews. No, I think there definitely was a process of de-intensifying who I was, and that can still, it's probably my husband would say it's a sort of work in progress still, because there's such a commitment in an environment that every single day you're going to give your absolute best, and probably that's a little full on in other parts of life at times. And so I think that's the expectations are high, which I generally still like, and makes things meaningful, but I think there's a sort of obsession that you're quite close to at that level, and then you sort of need to relax and actually think, some days, it's a good day because I haven't kind of pushed myself out of my comfort zone, and maybe I don't need to do that every single day, and but it's hard. It's a kind of hard thing to get the hang of, I think. I also think we often don't take opportunities to create a more motivating environment, that we could in the workplace. We tend to just think, is this all the stuff you've got to get done? But actually, can invest a bit more in helping people think about the meaning of the work they do and why it's important and sort of bringing in some of that, because I think that's part of what helps us to perform. But equally, it's okay to sort of have an off day sometimes. So it's just about, balancing out. Yeah. I think I'm still on that one.
So I'll do an online question. There's one in the corner. If we can get a microphone over there. And then I see one over there. But just questions come in from online, which I really wanted to put in. Hi, I'm a 15-year-old female, been rowing competitively for a couple of years, and want to go as far as I can with rowing. What advice would you give me at this stage, please?
15?
15, yes. Other than come to Jesus, row.
Yeah, I was going to say. Easy answers.
You're nearer to 15 than me. I wasn't rowing when I was 15.
I wasn't either. Let's see. I mean, I would say, really kind of get stuck in with the club that you're involved with. When you show up to training every day, work with your coaches. Make sure that you're part of the process as well. Part of the training, really, have a conversation with your coach about, you've asked me to make this change. Did I do it? Why am I doing it? How is that going to make the boat go faster? So really making sure that you're part of the process and kind of just keep developing, in that way. And then, come to Jesus College, row at Cambridge. I don't know.
One of the things I've sort of heard recently, and in fact, Andrew Randell, who coached the Australian coach, who coaches the British women at the moment in Paris, that part of there, when they were talking about the culture, they wanted, coming back to the previous question, and how do we want to be? And he would say, what sort of teammate do you want to be? And, you're in this environment, everyone's wanting to get in the Olympics, everyone's, but at the same time, we're a team sport, and that's, think about defining what that looks like. And I think that may be quite a nice sort of question to chew on. What's it like to be in a boat with you? And, what do you want others to kind of feel it's like being in a boat with you?
So I hope that's helpful, and do come and, I hope to see you here at Jesus sometime. We'll take a question back in the corner.
Earlier on you mentioned Brené Brown, and she obviously, her research is about vulnerability and also shame. When you have a bad day, how do you rebuild your relationships with the rest of your crew when you are feeling like you have let people down?
We had this, we raced yesterday, 2 days ago, and this exact thing happened where it just went catastrophically wrong. And I think the crew that we had, again, I think relationships are really important. And I think that's kind of the foundation for being able to do this. But we kind of acknowledged that, this didn't go well. It's not one singular person's fault, but actually it takes 9 people to make a boat go either fast or slow. Yeah. And so we all are taking accountability for what just happened. And then actually we need to make a choice to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And then you can kind of, I think for us, the first step was 1, the relationships, 2, acknowledging it, but then 3, kind of making a bit of an action plan to make sure that we can kind of move forward from there. And I think a lot of the culture that we have, both at Cambridge and at Thames and at Bates when I started there, was this kind of culture of it's okay to not have, every day is not going to be perfect, but every day is a kind of a learning opportunity there. And so actually you can't improve unless you have that catastrophically poor performance. And it's, in my eyes, it's only a failure if you haven't taken something from that. And I think that's kind of the key, is you will fail at some point. And it's just a matter of how do you actually take that failure or that poor performance and actually make something of it, Yeah,
I think the learning thing is the key, and definitely sort of shame was a big part of that early Olympic experience, the shame of not getting results. And we were treated differently. And so you inevitably felt that, on the way to a regatta, people chatted to you openly, and on the way home, if you hadn't performed, people treated, managers, people treated you differently, and that's an awful experience. And so I think, that, shifts now. I think people realise, that stopped me learning, because I'm just worrying about how awful I am and what a kind of failure I am, or I'm unworthy, and I'm wasting headspace and emotional energy rather than going, right, what did I find out today. And I think that's the sort of shift to this focus on improvement. Performance is about learning. And the races we lose, you know, we've learned a whole bunch of stuff about what we need to strengthen, what we need to do differently about ourselves, how we respond in those situations. And that's how we get better. So that for me has been that was part of that shift almost into the third Olympics, that those failures are, you know, we test ourselves every time we race. And so you would want to use that as much more of a learning focus.
We're beginning to run out of time. I'd like to fit in a few more questions, if that's all right. And there's one over here. Over here first, and then.
Kind of a very similar question, really, about failure. Cath, you talked about the kind of switch between your second and third Olympics and the mentality. If you could give yourself some advice, kind of immediately after that kind of such a big failure, that you viewed it, after your second Olympics, what would it be? Because when you feel like you've worked so hard for kind of this one event, what would, in the moment, you have liked to say to yourself?
You know, my value as a human being hasn't changed. And, you know, you're given everything, and go and have a look and see if you can do better next time, if you want to do it again, but not to link the result to my worth as a human, but actually to kind of celebrate you put yourself out there. And, you know, it's bloody tough. So I think that for me is you know, you need love from yourself, from other people. There's one thing I was very grateful for my parents, who, didn't have this sort of sporty upbringing. So for them, it was all a bit kind of odd. And, you know, the idea that this result was doing anything that was changing who I was seemed a kind of really mad and not entirely healthy idea to people who just weren't in the sports world. You know, but I was sort of sucked into it at that point. But I think, you know, the results can't define our value as a human being. It's, you know, it's neither more or less. And that was the sort of mistake I'd got locked into for a bit.
We'll take a question right at the top.
It's just a nosy fly on the wall question, because we always hear about, you know, we see the champagne and we see the shrieking and everything, but do you actually fit in a debrief after the boat race, and when?
So we do, actually, and it's quite an intensive debrief. Not in the moment, I will say. In the moment, it's go celebrate and have a good time. But a week or two after the race, after we've all kind of had time to calm down a little bit, get sober, we do sit down and as a crew, and we talked about the things that went well, the things that didn't go well, or didn't go as well as we would have liked. And so we have that, and of course, you know, we're taking notes because the cycle restarts again the next year. Yeah. And then, yeah.
Sorry. And everybody talks about 7 months, but do you not do anything over the summer? I can't quite believe.
Oh yeah, we do. So some athletes will, I mean, yeah, if you're going to do another cycle, you are still training, but the official start of the season is 7 months out. But some people will choose to do Henley. Some people will choose to just, to row with their colleges. Some people will choose to actually take a break from rowing and do other cross training and just stay fit in other ways and then come back in September. So,
two quick things from online to finish. One from Frances Harper. And Frances says, I'm approaching the age of 80. I was rowing at a young age and recently started rowing on the River Debon in Suffolk. After 3 sessions, I was basically told that if I couldn't carry the boat, I wouldn't be able to continue. I was very disappointed. What can you say to Frances, and how late can people keep rowing for?
I mean, Heather Charles has a 95 plus category, which I intend on enrolling that age. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really love that Frances is involved in what I think is probably the most important competition. The sort of, what is it? Can we move our bodies till we're 100 or something? The Centennial Olympics or something they call it, the Centenary. What is it? I've lost my language. Game. That's actually really important. I mean, there are safety elements, and so we need to to kind of make sure that's the case. But I guess adaptability is the key, isn't it? So finding lighter boats, learner boats maybe are kind of usually easier to maneuver, and find a different way to be on the river. But definitely he's doing the right thing to keep moving, and if we're rowers, we want to do that on the river.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go, Francis. So some hopefully helpful advice. So the final quick fire question that's come in: of the 8 in the boat, some would say it's 9. Which is the hardest seat to be and why?
I think they all have like an equally unique role, and I actually think like any rower you ask is going to have a different answer to this, because some people really like being in the stroke seat, and then some people are like, that is the hardest seat in the boat. I would never. My opinion, the cocks. I think that's the hardest seat in the boat, but that's because I did it once and I was terrible at it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, Cath, if you have an opinion.
There's no answer.
Yeah.
If you can answer that question, it's not really a crew.
Yeah.
So there we go. All of them are equally hard, except for maybe the cocks that is the hardest.
I think so.
Maybe the hardest seat is the one out of the boat, is the spare, is the reserve,
Yeah,
who's put in all the work and is crucial to the crew. And that's something that has really, sort of that mentality has really shifted again at Olympic level at Cambridge. We really value and look after the
we celebrate our spares at Cambridge in a way that I think I've never seen before. We're like the morning of the spares race, before the boat race, on the Wednesday before, the Cambridge spares race, the Oxford spares, and like we bring the entire squad out there. We have bottles of Prosecco, like we go nuts for the spare pairs race, just to kind of celebrate their achievement, because our spares do so much.
They're part of the squad. Yeah, they're a crucial part.
Well, thank you both very much. And just before we finish, can I just welcome our sponsor? So Professor Eilish Ferran is the Provost of the Gates Cambridge Trust. Eilish, thank you very much for supporting this event, for the drinks afterwards. Do you want to say a few words first to thank our wonderful panellists?
Thank you. And I've never been a sponsor before, so that's quite exciting. And I'm very conscious that I'm between you and a drink. So I'm going to be brief. I did want to just say a little bit about Gates Cambridge before thanking our 2 amazing speakers. So the Gates Cambridge Scholarship is a scholarship that brings international students to Cambridge to study for masters or PhDs. We're 25 years old this year. We began around the same time as the Gates Foundation began, and indeed we were one of the first gifts. Back in those days, Bill and Melinda left a lot of the work with their brand new foundation to his father, Bill Gates Sr. And Bill Gates Sr. was the person who ensured that this very large endowment came to Cambridge. It was, he always said, the favourite gift of his that the foundation ever made. It was an incredible gift. It was based on an intuition that there would be a lot of benefit from bringing these international students to Cambridge. Cambridge would benefit from having these brilliant students amongst us, and the criteria for selection are very high indeed. That the scholars would benefit from being part of this community, and that the world would benefit, because these smart people would come, have a brilliant time in Cambridge, would do their degrees, would be part of the Gates community as well as their college community and other communities, as we've heard about this evening. And then they would go out into the world and make it a better place. And that was really the essence of what he wanted to do with the Gates Cambridge Scholarship. And the core value that we all adhere to within that community, the Gates Cambridge, is improving the lives of others. And that's really the only condition that was set by the Gates Foundation, even though they were making what is still the biggest single gift to any university in the UK, even without adjusting for inflation. And I was reflecting on that value of improving the lives of others as I listened to the 2 of you. And there was so much emphasis on, not on success in the sense of winning, but on improving, just getting a little bit better each day. Jenna, I wasn't in your interview when you were selected as a Gates Cambridge Scholar, but listening to you and Cath, I could see why you were selected as a Gates Cambridge Scholar. The things you said about being part of a community, being there for each other, being vulnerable, being focused, all all of those things are the essence of a Gates Cambridge Scholar, and you embody that. So we're proud of you for all of the things that anybody in the world would say are success, because you have those in, many times over. But the two of you together exemplify something far more than those stereotypical measures of success. You're two truly outstanding people, and we've been very privileged to share this evening with you. So thank you.